Yeah, that's section. So he doesn't.
I'm pretty sure saying that it's.
Oh,
And I was just waiting for you.
If we lived in the paperless society,
I need paper.
then the visual paper,
That's-
an era thing,
It is.
but you wouldn't, so it's in the show.
Words are okay. I think diagrams and maps are a different thing.
So we're online, I think, aren't we, Georgia? Yes. So we're just getting organised. People that are listening in. Okay. Just before you start, Catherine, I note, Rachel, you've been busy on the email with various documents coming in. So that's great. Something from Mr. Milner and something from Mr. Heath and. Yep, no, we'll keep that. So thanks for doing that. Right, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
First thing I'd like to do is make a correction to my evidence on check.
Yes.
I would like to refer to Appendix 1, which was discussed yesterday during the hearing.
Mm.
And it referred to the package picture development area and an insurance letter written by Tahi in transit regarding the intersection. The plan in the letter that should have been appended to Appendix 1 has now been circulated. And I'd just like to hold up the plan. This is the plan.
We've got an A3, yes.
So the letter in 2009 from the Transport Agency, or Tahi as they know it now, referred to the area certified correct in the letter of certified plan. This is the certified plan. The plan which came into the evidence of error has an unknown source, and
Just that plan.
that's that plan, which came from, obviously has come from another document, which the Waka Kotahi don't have a record of, and it came from an alternative source.
Should we disregard that plan then?
Absolutely.
I'm a bit intrigued if how that got there. If it's your evidence, did someone put it in there by mistake
That
or?
was an error, yeah. So I believe the information first came via an email.
Yes, and this was attached with email.
Copied, I think, whilst Kotahi started researching background documentation. And then it was named in a file, and that got picked up by accident. And the appendix has been prepared.
Okay. Okay, no, that's great. So we'll just put across through that. We don't know where that was or origin or date or anything else.
Not the photograph document, the origin of it came from an email from Mr. Georgeson in the first instance. And so you'd have to ask him.
I will ask him now. Well, we're talking about the plan that's attached to the 2001 letter. Catherine saying that originally came from you. Is that right?
Was it, and I may have take that 1 point, but I received it prior to that from another source now.
Yes.
I can't just
Okay.
that source was.
Yes. Could you just find out what that document is and its date? And give us any information about it? Because even though it's been crossed out in evidence, we've now seen and discussed it and you've referred to it yourself, so.
I do have an email here from Liz responding on source of that. I guess the very original query from Mr. Georgeson in our posted regarding the area.
Yes,
I don't know if that's.
look, it's part of this urban growth background, which I've asked Megan to look at. This is, you can see it it's in the East Light folder. It's part of some sort of report. It's got a file reference at the bottom, which we can't see anymore. It's been discussed by Mr. Georgeson. I just want to have whatever information I can about the source of that plan and whether it's a long time ago or recent. I'm not sure.
It's
Yes.
So I will search that out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably in the. And that's the email that might have been. Last time, 18 months.
Okay, so that will clarify it. It's just a question of where it fits into the scheme of things, given the heading of the excerpt we have, a Packy growth area. Okay. Right, thank you for that, and that's all clear now.
So this has ended up being longer than I would have anticipated initially, but I hope that I'll introduce some of the questions that you've asked along the way. Which is sort of my intention.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the requester has, well, my full name is Catherine Choice and I'm planning consultant and director of Fibers Consultants, and I appear as expert witness for Africa Time. So the requester has lodged a request to change the combined district plan to enable residential development, including the retirement village, over land that is currently zoned for rural purposes. The land is subject of the request connects to the local road network, which in turn relies entirely on one intersection, Cashmere Oaks Drive and State Highway 2, which is simply as the intersection, and for access to and from Masterton and everywhere else. In essence, reliance on this one intersection with no other means of entry or exit for vehicle creates a large cul-de-sac urban environment. I attach a brief history of the Cashmere Oaks Drive intersection approvals that have been given by Whakatahi in the past, as it was raised during the hearing. So I have an attachment one, which you don't have because I had to redact some information from it, but I'm not sure if Dan's able to share that yet, but
Samantha's got an update, I think.
Okay, that's good. What I might do though, is I might start with just going through a very brief history of what Whakatahi has approved here in part, if it's going to be helpful to you. I'm going to first refer to the traffic impact assessment by Montgomery Watson as I read back in days, my document here. The reason why I want to pick this one up, even though it wasn't the first document written about this, is it attaches a copy, and I can give you the big plan of the very first plan of the inspection back in 2004.
Okay, just let's slow down a little bit. You've got an A3 plan there. We've got some A4 plans with an NWH logo on it.
That's the one in the green one.
Yes, and you're looking at the plan that's somewhere in this bundle.
I think that's the back.
Yes.
Okay. Would you like the A3 copy?
No, this is clear enough for me. Thank you. Yes.
The reason I include this is simply because it's dated. So we know this is the beginning point, 2004.
Yes.
And I think that's helpful context.
Thank you.
So at the time, obviously, this was put in, it was 2004, the current district plan wasn't operative. So there was a different planning policy framework in place at the time. Not sure what that was. the next, information that Walker Kentucky has shared with me from their files is from 2009. Where there was a further approval provided based on 35 lot subdivision, and this was notified to Walker Kentucky in 2009.
So if you're not, this isn't in your summary statement, what you're reading out, is it?
No,
No.
it's on, oh, it's up now, here we go,
Okay.
on the screen.
Okay, so we'll get a copy of that in due course.
Yes, you will. Yes, I
Yes.
apologize if you don't have a hard copy of that. I just-
Okay, that's fine. Yes,
So we've sent a copy of that to council in the past hour.
okay,
It should be in your email.
okay, thank you.
Cool. So. Walker Kentucky was notified of a 35 lot subdivision. In 2009, and the Montgomery Watson report. Traffic impact assessment on the effects of that. And there is also, I've included the Walker Kentucky, what we call a LUD, they call a LUD, a land use development report, which is the planning and the traffic issues with the proposal. Not sure how much detail you
That's
want me to go into.
2009, so that relates to the 35 lot subdivision.
Correct.
Yep, got that.
Now, if we look through the Montgomery Watson, it's very helpful with the photographs. And it has an outline. The second page of the subdivision being contemplated at that time in 2009.
Yes,
Showing post. And interestingly, also it shows photographs of the road environment. At page 5 and page 4.
shows more than 35 lots on the proposed site layout.
So this was stage 2, I believe.
Okay. But you, Samantha? Okay, so who is it and what's the name of the song?
Buddy Salute.
Good guess.
We know it's
Apologies, commissioners, okay. There's some reason that at the moment it doesn't know how to control this area, but it's got someone who is onto it.
Ready, Holly? Bravo, I love, thank you.
we got halfway there.
Okay, we were talking about the proposed site layout, page 2, 35 lots. This is. Looks like there's a key on the left-hand side there, isn't there, Catherine?
Yes.
Stage,
Stage 1, stage 2, I believe it says,
yes,
and there's the future stages.
so this was,
Showing different lots at all.
okay, thank you.
So this was 2009.
Was that stage 1 and stage 2 or stage 2, 3 and 4?
I think in the end it becomes the material, to
Okay.
be honest.
Yeah.
I wouldn't focus on that.
Mm.
I'm going to get to the big picture very quickly.
Okay, let's go.
I think the reason why I found this Montgomery Watson report helpful is because it attaches the line diagram of the original intersection from 2004, and then it also has photographs from the date at which the report was written, which was 2009 in October, and it shows the road environment of the day being in 2009. And I think what's important about that is comparatively, when I look at the other figures, and pictures that have been put up today, the road environment still looks very similar, 2009 to now. I think, what transpired following approval of these stages of development, and I have attached, this was a notified application on my ad in the day. The planning considerations in this Love Cashmere Oaks Estate 35 lot residential subdivisions that Harbour to Masterton. And all in there are all the considerations of the Transport Agency of the day, very similar to the considerations in fact that we are dealing with now. Considering turning movements, considering mitigations, considering context, and pointing out the activity status of the proposal under the district plan of the day in 2009, which still predates current operative plan of 2011. But it appears though the activity status is very similar. That was a discretionary activity. Because it didn't have a development concept or because it needed a development concept plan. My understanding is that following approval of those stages of subdivision, and Masterton District Council issued a statement following party agreement to conditions. And that agreed included the agreement between parties that any development within the OPP future development area shown in the Wairarapa Combined District Plan, planning maps, the attachment certified, which is the certified map by updated in my appendix, shall not trigger the need for an applicant to upgrade the intersection of Cashmere Oaks Drive and Flat Highway 2. And there was a note that the intensity of development must not exceed an average of 1,200 square metres. So that was very clearly established back in 2009. I understand at the time, and I attached to council's letter, a development concept plan, which is coloured green, blue, and yellow. And that was the development concept plan contemplated in 2009. That's my understanding.
Given that planning moves on, what's the point?
The point was people wanted to know the history. That's the history is.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, so are you saying something in these documents is relevant to our decision making here, or?
I think the road environment's important in our decision making here. That
Yes.
it's really changed, but it comes to that in my evidence.
Okay, thank you.
That's the history. In 2015, the development concept plan did change. And I think appended in my appendix, one of my evidence from chief is a copy of that amended development concept plan which Waka Kotahi approved. And that then included the what has become, it's quite an important way that we has been put together in the review.
It's appendix 1 or of your evidence?
Should have been.
Yeah, that's in.
Of the evidence in chief.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the letter, we've got plan, we've got a Form A. All right, yes, so there's another letter, June 2015.
And so that's just the concept plan moved on.
Yes.
From the 2009 to 2015,
Yes,
and it included separating out some land to access Nero Street for a retirement village development. And included then those 13 pathways that have been discussed today.
Yep.
So that is as I understand it, that is the current development concept plan under which the Cashmere Oaks is now being developed.
yes. Thank you,
Okay, so that is all the history that I understand it.
thank you. Right, we're coming back to your
Okay,
statement.
so I think that is paragraph 3. Move on to paragraph 4 of my summary. I also attach a brief summary of the Aviva Retirement Village, with some of the salient transport matters pertaining to the development of understanding has been advised to the involved parties. So there should be in the handouts that were circulated, short summary of the handout. Yeah, okay.
Is that the 1/6 summary, is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So whilst I was not involved for Kotahi, in this case, I was subsequently engaged to assist with ensuring the conditions were met with the between the leader or Kotahi and council. So I have some knowledge of the case. So the development was approved by council. It was under appeal of conditions by Kotahi, and the decision was confirmed by the Environment Court. Development is for 53 unit retirement village and a village community centre. And all up, having read the evidence of the traffic engineer for the case associated with between 200 and 250 vehicles per day. So relative, I guess, to the plan change that has been contemplated here, that was relatively small. The land was zoned industrial and it had an OPEC future development overlay, and that was more to the community values, etc. I understand. But the proposal was a full discretionary activity. A right turn bay was constructed to support the development. There wasn't one prior to this proposal, so that was the intervention to support the 53 houses and the 250 vehicles per day. On top of, I think Hensel's also used that access. That's on top of Hensel's traffic. There were other conditions about removing trees and closing other access ways and the like. But that was the key one with the right turn bays.
Who paid for that intervention, do you know? Avida paid for that. Thank you.
So the site is on the eastern side of the state highway, and the predominant right turn movement into the site, and that's already been discussed, so it's across one traffic lane. The predominant left turn out movements are towards Martinson, so they're not from the through road, the out movements are from the private road. I think that again, that's a difference between the Cashmere Oaks intersection and the Avida right turn bay. As you're coming from a private road when you're doing the left turn. So the conditions required both the right turn bay, along with the connections to the public walkway paths at the rear of the property. So that is all the council reserves on the eastern side. They're going right along the back of the property. And I understand that was, I guess it will all be in the decision, but that was a consideration that in fact the state highway doesn't provide any opportunity for safe pedestrian or cycling access. And as a result of that, there were conditions brought down regarding upgrading the connection between the private property and the public walkway to facilitate that multimodal aspect, because the state highway was an unsafe environment for it. So that's all I've got
Thank you.
in that summary.
Be on to paragraph 5.
Yes. I would like to draw attention to the integrated transport and land use environment description in my evidence and shade, and draw the distinction between the land urbanising as different from the road urbanising. I refer to both diagrams 2 and 3 in my evidence, and figures 1 to 7 is presented by legal counsel for Kotahi this morning. This morning we handed out some big aerial photographs
Yes.
and a bunch of pictures.
Yes.
And I will use that material now as I go through the rest of my evidence.
No criticism about small diagrams.
I consider the context pretty important in addressing the key transport issues raised by this plan change. Firstly, because the traffic growth on the state highway is not insignificant and should be accounted for in considering traffic safety effects. Secondly, due to speeds on this road, and thirdly, because in my opinion, the state highway still is largely rural rather than urban. I'll deal with traffic first. I prefer to rely on the most up-to-date traffic count data as presented by Mr. Connolly. I am advised by Welhom this was recorded both in 2019 as part of gathering data for considering the Avida case, and again in 2022 in partnership with the requester. These counts show that there was a growth of closer to 4 or 5% on the state highway rather than the intersection. Oh, yeah, big one.
And that was in COVID times too, that intrigues me.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I'll move on to paragraph 8, where I explain why I think technically it's different from the rest of the network. And the large aerial photograph was helpful in this, and I also allude to it in my evidence and shape. It must be diagram 2. The diagram 2 has got pink swatches.
Page.
I'm at page 8. So the traffic counters were put down just south of the Avida axis and just south, I think you could correct me if I'm wrong here, we showed it on the aerial photograph of the Kishman Oaks axis. So they were put down in the exact locations both times, so they're pretty accurate record of the traffic occurring. There is a telemetry site, which is what the continuous counting data that the transport agency has out on the network all over the place, and that's 18 kilometres north. I think Mr. Georgeson refers to that in his evidence. That's quite a way up the line. So I believe, in my view, you can see on the plans there's a lot of rural residential just to the north of what I'm going to call the RV corner, the end of the road.
Mm.
So I've outlined it in pink because it was very hard to get a good visual aerial photograph. We used down that small to put into evidence.
Mm.
I think the aerial photographs are really helpful at looking at that because you can start to see the spread of it out to the right hand side of the state highway. And you can see the cluster of it around about where the vineyard and winery is. And there's also a school about there as well. There's Oakham Primary School. That's down off the highway. When you go and visit that school, which I have done, there's actually a walkway underneath the railway lines connecting some of the rural residential to their local school underneath the state highway. It is an overbridge over the railway line. There's quite a lot of rural residential development to the north of the Arvida corner. And I believe that they are probably likely contributing to the higher than average traffic volume growth in this section of State Highway 2. So there's some real particularities here and give reasons why the traffic growth might be different here than it is in the wider network.
Catherine, what's the era of that? If the, like I can see on the big aerial, there seems to be a lot of small lots, and is that recent? Or is that just
Well,
evolved?
it's Google Maps, so
Yeah.
it's whatever Google Maps says.
Yes, but you got no background about when all this rural res happened.
No, Walker Kotahi isn't consulted on these subdivisions,
Yes.
so council would be the best source of truth.
Okay.
You presumably that's enabled by a rural residential zoning as opposed to small lots occurring in the rural zone.
I believe it's rural primary zone and there's a 4 hectare minimum lot size.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Hang over provision at present relating to titles before X date.
It is grandfather.
Grandfather, yes, yeah.
But some of this, yeah. A lot of the houses are new. I've driven around the area, I've driven down the roads, and the houses are very new. And there's also, when you zoom in on the pedestrians, there's a lot of empty lots as well, lots that are not yet built on. And I talked to this a little bit in my evidence and shape, so there's more to come, I believe, is I guess what I'm getting at, and the traffic volume growth on the state highways not insignificant at this particular locality, and I think these are some of the land uses driving that growth. So these counts, the counts that were taken on State Highway 2, north and south of the Kashmir Oaks Drive intersection, they also show that weekdays are typically busier than weekends, and there are spikes in traffic movements, particularly on Friday afternoons, and more people are moving about, and volumes reach 7,000 vehicles per day on the state highway. Mr. Connolly has those traffic volume counselling has evidence. If these trends continue, and if you apply a 4 to 5% average growth rate, daily traffic volumes in the state highway will exceed 8,000 vehicles per day within 10 years. So given the reliance on state highway two as the main connection between the intersection and Masterton, it is my view that this transport corridor and the wider functions it performs are key matters for considering the objectives and policies of the combined district plan, and they should be given weight because of this. In particular, district plan objective 1731, which seeks to maintain the safe and efficient operation and development of the road network from the adverse effects of dangers, while maintaining the network's ability to service the current and future needs of the wider region. In other words, the road infrastructure should not be reduced off following development. So the thrust of my evidence is this objective sets a resource management bottom line. The maintenance of state highway two is regionally significant infrastructure within the district plan hierarchy of roads and policy framework, and this is what the plan change should not challenge. In the evidence of both Mr. Landon Lane and Ms. Apologies for that, Greta. What is evident to me is that the vehicle volumes associated with the trending up of crash risk rates. This makes traffic volume predictions important to get the trend rates accurate, and indicates that growing vehicle volumes can undermine the intersection rather than maintain its safety. I consider the threshold for the intersection has been established by Welhom, and that is clearly outlined in their meeting date of December 2009. The plan change vehicle generation rates used by the applicant are unclear, and I'm not sure what council rates were used in the assessments carried out, including the civil modelling done by Mr. Georgeson and subsequent analysis by Mr. Nielsen. Mr. Lane relied upon the most up-to-date vehicle count on the state highway, and then tested several growth rate scenarios and relied upon the following rates for the land uses promoted by the plan change. And these correlate to the numbers which Mr. Connolly put up earlier. So looking at the existing consented environment, Cashmere Oaks, 161 residential sites at 9 trips per lot, so you get 1,449 vehicle movements per day. Then you add in the plan change, got scenario 1 for residential development. You're adding in 2,286 vehicle movements. For plan change 2 with the retirement village and some residential, 1,833. The total traffic generation on the side road of Cashmere Oaks Drive would be somewhere between 3,283 and 3,734 post plan change.
Yes. I think the figure I put to Mr. Conley was 3,600.
Okay, well, look, this really does highlight to me, look, we do need this agreed statement of facts. We'll call it that. This technique that quite often the Environment Court uses to have experts produce an agreed statement of facts relating to the modelling, the traffic counts, the DSI calculations, the syndrome modelling. And we'll talk about that some more at the end of the hearing, but just signalling that we've got numbers flying around the place, and that's just going to be critical for us. So thank you. We'll carry on at paragraph 13.
The above rates for predicting the future number of vehicles entering and exiting the intersection identify significant and rapid, more than doubling vehicle count. These predictions rely only on residential activities occurring, and so could be conservative given that 2 dwellings per lot are permitted and other non-residential activities are anticipated under the district plan. And just here I will pause because I do know in Mr. Lewandowski's amended controlled activity model that he has added in there for future residential development on the balance in the plan change area, that there should be a limit of 1 dwelling per.
Yes.
Yeah, so I acknowledge that he's added that in, but for the Cashmere Oaks, which has these very large lots, they could easily accommodate 2 dwellings on many of their properties in there. And we're not really counting those. We're counting the best case scenario, not the potential worst case or even a mid case. And I think important to bear that in mind.
Yes. Can I just explore that very briefly? Been around this site a couple of times now, becoming quite established. The stage one development, there's some large allotments, but there's also some very large dwellings on those, quite often central to the allotment.
Yeah.
What's the realistic ability of those developing into two lot or two dwelling scenarios?
Well, I have a very big house like that, and I understand you don't want to compromise your home and garden.
Yes.
I do see a potential for smaller homes. The granny flat scenario could come back in. So there are other ways. It might not be another second big family home.
Yeah.
That might be a secondary dwelling, and that would be fairly complex in some of the
What about stage two, which is currently under development?
Yeah.
Do you have any evidence that would suggest that there's a move away from single dwellings on those 80 allotments? Stage two?
that they could be.
Yes,
or
well,
they're
that-
likely to be.
Likely to be or are? Have you looked
Yeah,
at?
no, I'm not aware of any subdivision applications to further subdivide
Okay.
those.
Thank you.
So that's simply pointing to what the district plan would allow in the
Yes,
future.
Yes,
At any time.
but I think the modern parlance is sort of that's the theoretical capacity,
Correct.
and I think can come down to get a realistic capacity based on a number of factors, such as the ones I've just discussed with you.
Correct. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
agree with you. Mr. Connolly explains that the proximity of the plan change site to Masterton on off-putting distance for short and frequent trips. I think that's quite important to bear in mind. Serving traffic generation rates. But overall, the anticipated side road vehicle numbers are starting to approach around about half of the total number of vehicles on the state highway through road. And are potentially conservative. I say they are conservative, but I'm going to add in there they are potentially conservative. There's based on our discussion right here.
Thank you.
On the speed, I'm advised that safe and appropriate speed is 80 kilometres per hour based on the rural context of the road. And I agree, this context still looks more open than urban, and that lends itself to speeds at which motorists drive. The operational speed being over 80 kilometres per hour. At this point, I think it's probably helpful to reach for the figures 1 to 7, which Liam used this morning. I'm going to talk for a couple of minutes here. And I'm also going to refer to attachment 3 to my supplementary evidence. It's an email from the New Zealand Police to people looking for safety. Sent to the traffic engineers there. If we look at want to look at figure 5 in particular. And let's just see what we look at those side by side. One leads to the other, of course.
You just catching up.
Yeah, sorry, I was on the wrong attachment 3. Got it now.
Right. So figure 4, first of all, is right at the Kitchen Mix intersection, looking south back towards Masterton.
You want us to look at figure 5 or figure 4? Yes.
And then as you travel along the road, you head to figure 5, which is well inside the urban environment.
Yes.
And it's got the second line of 50 signs put up.
Yes.
And so they're quite well inside where the actual threshold is. And the email from the New Zealand Police talks about the fact that people are speeding in this location, even though it's a 50 kilometre per hour road environment. In the beginning of this email chain, So Mr. Alan French appears to be constable, Wairarapa Road Policing. And he's had some speed camera operators out in the area. He says running a few tasks for me in the area, and they've mentioned to you that the speed on Opaki Road has been a big concern. And he's got a preliminary report from the operator who conducted a 3-hour observation exercise on the northbound traffic, monitor drivers accelerating to an excess of 57 kilometres per hour and higher as they approach the hill and well before the 100 kilometre per hour signage. So of the 1,069 vehicles that travelled north, so leaving Masterton, driving towards Cashin Oaks intersection, 325 of them were exceeding 57 kilometres per hour. So they're just expressing concern that this road actually operates a little faster than it should, given the posted speed limit. And I think when considering speed, I think my evidence is speed. This relates to Glenn's evidence. The road needs to look and feel like speed, posted speed limit. And that's quite important.
Can I just interrupt for a minute? We've just picked up that the people online seeing these documents.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt the flow, but I just need to work out whether they've been sent through a digital form to us and whether
Are these the documents, Rachel, you're talking about, the big plans?
Yeah, not sure if we have actually, apologies. I understand. We could share our screen, if that's helpful.
yeah, that would be
Yes,
excellent.
share the screen, so I certainly won't volunteer for that job, because I normally fail.
No, that's okay.
So I think just rewind and start again with that. When we're looking at figures 4 and 5 and refer and relate it to the, I think everyone does have your summary statement with attachment 2. Oh, sorry, it will be attachment 3. The email from New Zealand Police.
I'll wait until we put it up on screen.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I just didn't realise.
Okay. See your calendar, I think, Liam. Oh no, here we go. Yeah, we're gonna look at figures 4 and then 5. It's figure 2. Okay, got it sideways, so you have to turn your heads around those people on the screen. So just this is figure 4. Let's explain what we're seeing here. That's figure 5, sorry. Yes. Right hand side of the screen is figure 4.
Correct.
And just explain what we're looking at.
So what we're looking at here is a photograph of State Highway from the Cashmere Oaks intersection looking south towards Narrabeen. So this is in the current 100 km/h road speed environment. You can see the threshold by the red truck.
Yes.
It's a good indicator actually of where the threshold is. That's the urban threshold. And as you drive past that urban threshold and into figure 5,
We'll move to figure 5, Samantha.
so figure 5 is well inside the urban boundary. This is just past the street. And from here, so where those handrails are, that's downhill grade towards Cashmere Oaks Drive. And this is where the police have done the reporting somewhere in this vicinity and have said we're concerned about speed, people heading down the hill, heading towards the 100 km/h threshold, but speeding before they get there.
Heading up the hill or down the hill?
Down the hill.
Okay.
That's what they say in their email.
Okay, so that's your attachment 3.
Correct.
Okay, so I think we've caught up now. So come back to your statement.
Of doing what the Pitahi and New Police who are concerned by vehicle speeds inside the existing 50 km/h speed limit area, which is part of the urban environment. However, motorists regularly speed. That's another indicator of the speeding issue is the fact that the second line of 50 km/h speed limit signs has been erected well inside the first speed limit threshold as a means of reminding drivers they are now well inside the urban speed area. That's what's shown for the second line and visual indicators to drivers to please go 50 km/h. Again, referring to figures 1 to 7 and legal submission, showing an aerial view. And I'd just like to go back to this very large aerial view and figures 1 and figures 2. Yep, those two. So what's evident when you look down in plan view, it looks like the area is developing in plan view. However, when you look at the state highway road infrastructure, it's not urban. It doesn't have footpath like along the booking places. And the road environment is still relatively open. That's not enclosed like an urban environment. In 2009, the road environment had not changed. Aside from, in the last few years, the council recently connected the footpath where it had terminated at the edge of the Cashmere Oaks boundary and connected it to footpaths inside the urban area. That footpath connection, if we look at figure 2, you can see the footpath is brighter, whiter, where it's been connected. But that's, to my understanding, the only change in the road environment that's happened since 2009 is that footpath connection's been made by council.
So just to the left of the figure 5 arrow, is that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
On page 4 now. In other matters, In terms of multimodal connections, having listened to the evidence of Mr. Georgeson, his walkthrough, and that of Mr. Lewandowski, I agree that the Miro Street offers a pedestrian and possible cycle connection. This will be useful to future residents. The convenient use of this access will be determined by where one might live within Cashmere Oaks or the plan change area and the access points from there. However, the concept plan proposed does not clearly show these connection locations, so it is difficult to determine what might be a preferred route for a cyclist or a pedestrian leaving the plan change site. I have based my evidence on the safety effects assessments of Mr. Connolly and Mr. Landon Lake, and still prefer their evidence over that of Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Muir for the following reasons. I disagree with the description of the road environment offered by Mr. Georgeson, that it is urbanising, for the reasons I give above and explain in reference to figures 1 to 7's table by Legal Counsel. I am unsure of the vehicle generation rates used by Mr. Georgeson and Mr. Wilson for the State Highway 2 traffic growth rate relied upon by them in the assessment of effects, given the different growth rates identified on the state highway, particularly as Mr. Georgian refers to a 2% growth rate, whereas at this locality it's closer to 4 or 5%. As many safety effects are related to vehicle volumes rising, I consider this a key consideration. The safety management response and interventions proposed by Mr. Georgeson and Mr. Nielsen are inadequate and bear no relationship to the crash risk effects, which are likely with high consequences. A situation which, if not addressed, will not achieve the environmental bottom line of maintaining the safe and efficient operation of the road. The safety management response and interventions proposed by Mr. Georgeson and Ms. Nielsen are inadequate in that they do not propose to bring forth infrastructure with development to provide for multimodal transport choices. This is the direction strengthened by the NPSUD, which in 2021 updated district plan policies on infrastructure and development approaches. I would also like to point out at this point that between 2004 and 2009, the initial Cashmere Oaks intersection was constructed. They brought the infrastructure first. Since 2004, there have only been 71 houses built. Development is now ongoing, but essentially that intervention at that time addressed all the future potential effects coming forward from all of the development within the area. So they brought the infrastructure first to start on. The evidence of Mr. Connolly and Mr. Linden Lane is that the receiving road environment, and in particular the intersection, is not designed and developed to cater for the volume of traffic likely to be generated by development, the plan change that enables. Considering whether those effects are minor, whether prior intervention is necessary, and the nature of the intervention required, I comment in the following paragraphs. It is clearly demonstrated by all traffic engineering evidence that the intersection will not be maintained post plan change development. Levels of service will drop and crash rates will trend up, including death and serious injury crashes, which have consequences that are more than minor and economic consequences on the community. I think Mr. Landon Lane and his evidence in chief introduced the economic cost associated with the DSI on road. It is reasonable to expect the effects associated with these outcomes to be addressed. Mr. Connolly has advised that a roundabout intersection would mitigate the effects without that being a disproportionate or extreme option. There may also be other options, but none have been suggested by the requester. I note, however, that marrying up a mitigation option with the road environment in this rural road context is not straightforward, particularly in light of the prescriptive nature of speed management processes under the land transport rules. Objective SLD4, managing urban growth in the combined district plan, requires that growth does not adversely affect the safe and efficient use and development of roads. Structure plans are identified as a method of implementing this policy, and in my view should be used in this case. Perhaps not to the level required for Wainava industrial area, but in more detail than a development concept plan because of the varied nature of future development, the several points for transport connections, the fact the effects on infrastructure are remote from the plan change site, and the fact there are no current investment plans by Whakatahi Full Council. In this regard, I can, if you want me to, take a look at the Waingawa structure plan. I'm familiar with the Waingawa structure plan. I've dealt with issues regarding that plan. And I can talk to it a little bit if it's helpful.
We've read that in your evidence.
Do you have any questions on?
No, I think we're familiar with that approach and we've had a look at that. Thanks, Catherine.
And considering what a structure plan might include in terms of traffic and transport issues, identification of all access locations into and across the plan change site, all modes of transport in such detail as can be readily identified clearly on the plan would be a minimum. For example, where cycling and walking pathways connect relative to roads, and identification of the upgrades required at the intersection and potentially between the intersection and the 50 km/h speed limit threshold. It is not appropriate to identify new potential connections to the state highway unless Waka Kotahi has approved those given the limited access road status and the need for road controlling authority approval. A controlled activity status for either subdivision or a retirement village development is inappropriate for several reasons, but importantly, because of the effects on regionally significant road and infrastructure, without the ability for the road controlling authority to be identified as an effective party and fully participating in the consenting process. The controlled activity status is disproportionate to the effects on infrastructure that the district plan objectives and policies seek to manage, and there is no ability to define a proposal. A discretionary or even restricted discretionary activity status is more appropriate, both subdivision and retirement village development, so long as the matters for discretion are appropriate. Considering section 32 tests for appropriateness in relation to effectiveness and efficiency, a discretionary or restricted discretionary consenting pathway alongside a structure plan would be clear and effective in response to the combined district plan policies addressing subdivision, development and infrastructure, and would not present unrealistic obstacles to any future applicant. I think I will ad lib here and just acknowledge that what's important, I think, to future my experience in working with developers in dealing with consenting is that people want some reassurance that they know what they're walking into. People don't like surprises. And I think the discretionary activity pathway could certainly provide those assurances to future applicants as to what is expected in the consenting pathway. The plan change site location in comparison with the orchard site, as shown in figures 6 and 7.
Yes.
This is Greytown, isn't it?
This is great, yep.
Yeah.
So the orchard, of course, is the component to the role on which the plan change is premised. So I thought it was important to have a look at where that was. So it's quite a different, in my opinion, it's quite a different location, and the plan change applications that we're looking at now cannot be considered like for like or be managed in the same way as the orchards like dollars. The orchards is located amongst the network of local roads with several frontages and connection points, whereby traffic and people movements are dispersed throughout the road network from the outset and within walking distance from the Greytown Centre. I am advised by Waka Kotahi this plan change was not opposed by them. The plan change site, on the other hand, is effectively located at the end of a cul-de-sac, where transport options are limited, placing considerable pressure on an existing road infrastructure and putting pressure on a pinch point being the intersection. I do not consider that Chapter 23 of the Combined District Plan on financial contributions offers any assistance because taking monetary contributions will not assist Waka Kotahi as the contributors to council. Any potential amendments, as have been discussed during the course of the hearing, will be immaterial to assisting with state highway mitigation. The chapter, in my view, applies to local authority assets and infrastructure and not state highway infrastructure. In terms of section 74 matters, I consider the plan change must be in accordance with, amongst other things, the NPSUD and the Wairarapa Combined District Plan and the provisions of Part 2. In its current form, I do not consider the plan changes in accordance with all of these provisions.
Commissioner Marr's written down 7 questions, so on that basis, or 7 topics. I think I'll sit back and let him do the initial plan at the planner discussion.
And keep it pretty high level, Mr. Marmon. I don't have 7 questions, but I have 7 topics. When I read your evidence in chief, I have a tendency to oversimplify things, but what particularly in section 4, where you're summarising your evidence, identified what I thought you were identifying as 2 key issues. First of those comes at paragraph 4.9, which I call the big strategic policy direction type issue. And essentially, you're saying that there are a number of strategic issues and a number of documents that need to be finalised. And I think what's happening with St. Mass, it would be premature to make a decision on the plan change until the direction of travel on those is more certain. The second issue sort of starts at paragraph 4.4, 4.5, and that's squarely focused on the transportation effects and how they should be dealt with, when they should be dealt with, and the process for dealing with them. And it's really that second issue that I want to focus my questions on. You've very helpfully, and so has your legal counsel, identified one of the key issues in the section 32 test, and that is that plan changes must give effect to the objectives of the plan. And assuming that those objectives already give effect to the higher order objectives, and we note that there's no change to the objectives posed by the same change, so we can assume that those objectives in the plan, operative plan, are still fit for purpose. You'd agree with that? Yes. And so at paragraph 21 on your summary statement, you've alluded to or identified objective SLD4. That's the managing urban growth, so that does not adversely affect the safe and efficient use and development of roads, including the state highway.
Yep.
And obviously there's other objectives relating to residential development and promoting that. All those objectives have to be considered together. So that's the objective, that we have to be satisfied that the provisions give effect to and that the provisions are most appropriate, isn't it?
Great.
Yes. Okay. And so the question really distills, well, step back. We had an interesting conversation with Mr. Connolly earlier, and I asked him the question about fundamental impairment. He answered in the negative, that he wasn't prepared to say that, but what he did say was that there was an ability to deal with these matters, and I think he agreed, subject to your agreement, that the best, that comes down to what process is adopted, and of reading process as being the type of consent structure. You're following me so far, aren't you? Yes, yes. So I understand your position, and I'm sorry if I'm going over old ground, but it's developed a little bit, and the 6 or 7 points that I noted down are my attempt to refine your position on what that activity status should be. And so in no particular order, it's an activity status that has the capability of involving Waka Kotahi in a meaningful way. That it has the ability to assess all transportation issues, not just the safety on the highway. That it has the ability to take into account cumulative impacts. That it may have reference to or require consideration to a structure plan. And that it has the ability to decline if it's not possible to mitigate effects. There are 5 matters. The 6th matter that I put a question mark against, and I'd be interested in, is the ability to address funding for any infrastructure solutions. But I'm not certain that that's something that the activity status should look at, but I'd be interested in your view on that matter.
I don't think the activity service prescribed that,
Yes,
which is a problem.
yes,
You're dealing, when you want to cost share.
yes.
So, and the issue of cost share came up earlier, and you were looking for examples. I can give you an example. I've been consulting into the Kotahi for 7 years. I've been involved in lots of issues. And I do have an example at the top of the south, that was Nelson Hops, and they wanted to expand the factory, and they were going to add traffic to the intersection. And what it was going to be unsafe. The intersection was already unsafe. And Waka Kotahi said you can't add to an existing unsafe situation without mitigation. It just so happened that there was the annual plan at that time for road maintenance and upgrade on the way, but they didn't have enough money for the upgrade. And so what Waka Kotahi did was they figured out the new proportion of traffic that the Hops business was going to add. They were going to add 20% of traffic to the intersection. And so they were asked to pay 20% of the cost. That collected up in the coffers, and then there was enough money for the upgrade of the intersection. It also transpired that the funding were not made available by the agency, or got a draw on funding. They didn't get it over the line internally. New Zealand, Nelson Hops undertook to pay for the whole upgrade themselves. So they had two options, and that was the negotiated position. So when there was a question about whether these positions are arrived at, yes, they are. But where there is no public funding, the developer bears cost. So with regards to whether structure plans and plan provisions can build that in, it's very difficult to build that in. And that is where we come back to, are we better to wait for the district plan? Because you can align it all up together. I know Emma gave evidence, and she talked about the point of entry. That's the beginning of a business case that would have worked alongside any district plan proposal to add land into the urban area.
Sure.
And worked it all out that way.
Yes. In the absence of any future provisions, the district plan, to what extent does the financial contributions play a part in the current operative district plan?
At this stage, my reading of section 23 is that they provide money only to council,
Yes,
and
at a prescribed rate, 2% or whatever.
Yes.
Yes,
and that would council being having worked with other councils in the biograph, they say they cannot use that money in the state highway environment. But they can't even pick it up and go and do it themselves.
does it preclude council and Waka Kotahi coming together to co-fund something like that? Using money that they've collected from a development to
Still need a business case.
still, okay. And where does that business case come? Is it a joint effort between the council and Waka Kotahi, or solely what?
Opportunities.
Joint effort?
But then it goes back to those funding pool that Emma was talking about
Yes.
earlier today.
Yes. Okay, no, that's good. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, so in terms of, let's put funding aside, and in terms of those 5 other matters, the question that we've put to you and Mr. Lewandowski and SPA is which provision is most appropriate having regard to effectiveness and efficiency.
Okay.
And you might get different answers depending on whether you apply the lens of efficiency or effectiveness, presumably. And you're going to, I don't want to sort of precipitate the exercise you're going through with your 2 colleagues. But in your words, what are in terms of those 5 matters, what are the limitations of controlled activity in your view?
The limitations are that the road controlling authorities may not agree with the remediations or interventions required to address safety effects.
Is that an outcome, a limitation with the outcome, the decision?
So the limitation with the control activity is well, in the way that it's being drawn up for the plan change.
Yes.
Yeah, so there is consultation if you adopt Mr. Lewandowski's latest version. Let's assume that that's the case. So consultation has to occur, so the council can be informed of Waka Kotahi's position.
Yes.
They can then impose conditions, and they can choose whether to take Waka Kotahi's position or the the applicant's position, it might be different, it might be the same at
Yes.
that point. If it is different, that puts the council in a squeeze.
Yes,
And then the council becomes adjudicated between those issues, and then you get into some pretty wrangling processes after that.
yes. I guess what I'm thinking of is that if there are things like inputs to a consent process, the process itself, and then the output being the decision, what you're saying, or what I'm hearing you saying is that the input from Waka Kotahi would be secondhand in a sense that it would be reliant on the applicant at the time conveying in their ITA what the nature of that consultation has been,
Correct.
as opposed to being more direct.
Correct.
Okay. In terms of what's your commentary on how that might input? You might have asked this already, but just for the record, what's your commentary on the output as a result of that indirect input from the consent or absence of
So
consent?
the consent could be very frustrating because you might not be able to get the to it.
Yes, okay.
And that wouldn't bear up in the section 32 test and one.
Yes.
At all.
Okay, thank you. So that's the consultation and engagement with Waka Kotahi component. What about the ability to assess all transportation matters compared to it with a controlled activity as suggested by Mr. Lewandowski and with the matters of control, and at the other end of the spectrum, let's assume just fully discretionary where all matters are at table. Is there any substantive difference in the ability for the council between those matters of control and a fully discretionary to consider the transportation
Yeah, I
effects?
think it's quite different. I really would at this point like to refer to those proposed rules.
Got-
I think it would actually be quite helpful.
I can give you a copy of them.
Copy it on, and I
Oh,
do-
it's not-
oh, sorry,
Okay.
here we go.
If you go to second last page, oh, sorry. Second last page, it's 5.53. And it's under amendment 4, I think.
But I mean, it's six.
No, it's amendment 4, I think. Oh, it's amendment 4 read in conjunction with amendment 6.
Okay.
So Mr. Lewandowski's altered from the notified version, Roman numeral 4. And it's blue text there, A, B, C, D, and E.
So controlled activities are following a controlled.
Yes,
activities.
yes.
So. Okay, so can I please ask, what was the question?
Question is there any substantive difference in the matters that the council consider between the matters that Mr. Lewandowski has listed in Roman numeral 4 to be read in conjunction with the information requirements that are set out in Amendment 6? Is there any difference between that and what the council could consider as a fully discretionary activity?
Well, this compared to a fully discretionary activity is different because this is narrow. This is narrowed down. Improvements and alterations to existing roads. Safety improvements to the intersections that are to in catchment roads. The difference is, I suppose, these are things that these are to understand or provide provision for these things, but whether or not they are acceptable. And you can't test them in the same way as you would test that's a discretionary activity, because you have to grant consent.
Is it the right list of things though, Catherine, that you consider Waka Kotahi want to consider in terms of the overall function? Seems to be pretty comprehensive to me, but are there other things that you could think about as a discretionary activity?
I think it's not, one thing that's not on this list is the distance between the state highway, speed threshold and the intersection, that distance of road. And because roads are linear and people travel them, it's never just that one little point. As people travel along the road, and so I would say it's missing the context.
What would you add in there if you had if you wanted to put an F in there to capture that point?
I think it's quite difficult to capture that point, in a narrow sense in which.
You're looking at the surrounding state highway environment up and down the road and how it relates to the intersection. I think that's what you're getting at, isn't it?
Pretty much, so you'd have to look north of the intersection and all the way south of the intersection to at least the existing 50 kilometres an hour threshold. That would be our excellent model thing to see how that intersection is going to function in the context of the road. So the whole context is missing.
Yes, okay, well, you could, someone, lawyer, planner, but there's something like that in, couldn't they?
Good.
Yes, but if that's what you think's missing, and whether it's controlled or it's actually a restricted discretionary activity, so it becomes a matter of discretion. You know, as long as the right matters were really focused in on that, I think that was originally your questioning.
It is.
I
Yes,
think it's also unclear about the provision for public transport facilities and infrastructure. That doesn't say where they need to be. So is that within the site or is that in the broader transport context? So does that mean you're trying to get people or provide a way that people cross that highway to? Where does that apply to?
oh,
Yeah, so I think it's unclear and I think that that would need to be added. Clarity to the list.
so what I'm thinking about is that for the planners exercise we've asked for, I think you need to put that exercise, you need to actually look at what would be some sort of evolution of what we have here into an RDA, or because discretion is just fully discretionary, you don't list matters, and maybe what might be looked at in an RDA enhanced list of matters that, and if there's disagreement on that, we could see that in the statement. Does that sound fair?
But if you ask me my opinion on whether RDA is appropriate,
Yes,
I would have said entirely appropriate connected to a structured plan, yes.
yes, okay,
If
so
the discretionary was appropriate, I would have said if there was no structured plan, yes.
okay.
So I see a hierarchy there.
Yes, okay, so I think there's some detail and we'll talk about how we're going to frame that planners discussion or planners conferencing before we end today.
I think there's a lot of interpretation problems with this structure.
I will look forward to that, but there's one follow-up question on that, and from a purely planning point of view, what's the purpose of, in your view, of matters of control on a controlled activity?
You're trying to control things that you know are going to have an effect, but a small effect, something that's not going to materially undermine the policies of the plan.
Yes. And what's the outcome, in your view, of those, of exercising those matters of control on a consent? What's typically the outcome?
The anticipated outcomes of the plan achieved. It's typically the outcome. I'm answering your question.
No, I don't want to give you a too direct question. What's anticipated with a controlled activity with matters of control? What's the anticipated result of that resource consent?
As control, in my experience, usually becomes more mild. Where you generally know the outcome.
Yeah. Look, I'll ask
And it's just the way in which the outcome is produced.
I'll ask it straight. Isn't it that the consent will be granted, usually on a non-notified basis
Sense,
with
yeah.
conditions
That's
of
what
consent?
you've got an expected, that there's an anticipated expected
Yeah.
outcome that the plan is already contemplated.
Yes,
And I think it's different from the policy framework and the plan. What it's saying about growth is we were unsure of the outcome, that's the structural thing.
yes. So if you're measuring the appropriateness of that technique, controlled activity, notwithstanding that there could be some nuances to the matters of control, question that the panel have is that the best provision, most appropriate provision to give it effect to objective SLD4, which is allowing growth that doesn't adversely affect the safe and efficient use and development of roads.
No, because we don't know whether we're going to be able to deal with the effects.
We know that unless there's some extenuating circumstances, the consent will be granted and subject to conditions that might deal with improvements and alterations to roads, safety improvements to the intersection of the highway, and other matters, which if the applicant is not satisfied with, would need to lodge section 357 objection, and then an appeal if there's no resolution at that point.
And therefore it's not effective or efficient.
Well, it might be efficient, it depends, it might be efficient for the applicant.
Yes, efficient in the sense that it must be granted.
Yes,
Yes, but not if they have to appeal, that will.
yes. Okay. Look, I could take that a long way further, but I'm conscious of time and I'm also conscious of the further exercise. The reason I focused on that issue is because you would have heard me talk about primary and secondary relief with your council earlier this morning. And it struck me that in terms of the primary relief, which is decline to plan change, based on the evidence from Mr. Connolly and his answers to questions, that there seems to be, I'll be frank, there seems to be less basis to pursue that primary relief on a transportation basis now, that the focus seems to be more on getting the activity status right.
That is partly true. I would only say that to confirm the plan change now would be a precursor to the proposed district plan coming out. And
Yes, and I thought you might say that, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but that doesn't preclude your primary relief being based on other matters such as strategic fit, etc. Yes. Okay. Look, I'm going to leave it there because I don't want to be leading you too much on that, and I'm conscious you've got an exercise to do with your colleagues.
Okay, thank you, David. I've got some pretty focused questions. The first one relates to the objective. And you talk about two objectives from the plan, SLD4 and also, what's the other one? Made a note of it. 1731 on your page 2. They're from different parts of the district plan, yes. And this is where I was getting to with Daniel, you know, and Mitch talking about the objective. Those two objectives you've pulled out, they're the key objectives from a transportation infrastructure point of view.
yes, I think from a transportation perspective, I think everyone is good.
So they both work in concert. So if we put an objective for us to consider as in our decision making around this key issue of accessibility and safe and efficient access and safety, those would be the two we put right at the front of
Yes,
wanting to be satisfied that was being met. Okay, thank you. My second question was about in paragraph 20. He made a side comment about, I think it was Mr. Connolly, I'm not sure. Somewhere in evidence we have an estimation of the socioeconomic cost of a debt, Mr. Langdon Lane, and that was around $2 million per debt.
Between 2 and 3 million.
Okay. So, and I've seen that before, because you know, what is the cost of life? It's a terrible metric, but that's been established through a methodology and seems to be an accepted figure. So that's
Yeah, I believe that's the ministry. Yes.
MOT. Okay, thank you. I'm interested then about the discussion about funding. That my understanding of financial contributions or collected through resource consents and development contributions is they really have to be, like, they should really be targeted at the effects of a proposal and not just not go into a general slush fund. Is that your understanding too?
Yes, and I think that the general contributions that are taken go to the council's probably better to answer them, but they've got a management plans that they need to administer and they've figured out. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that could go to things like, that could be targeted to things like increased cycleways along the railway corridor, bridges over the, you know, to actually really home in on that. That aspect. They could be applied to extra funding for public transport and bus routes.
My understanding is. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I had a figure of 150 million development cost in my mind broadly. So if you do the maths, we're talking about $3 million of, this is a large project for Masterton. That's a significant amount of funding that would flow through into targeting, you know, addressing effects of the project. So I just wanted to get your opinion just about how that might work. It might not be available for the state highway improvement. And maybe it's not you to answer this, but is it impossible for it to be applied to a state highway through agreement from the council improvement?
I can answer that to a degree.
Mm.
So my understanding is that when the road is down to 50 kilometres per hour, behind the curve is council's responsibility anyway, because you've urbanised that road, there are manifold improvements in place. So that council would then take contributions and fix that behind the curve.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and talking about
Footpaths and booms and furniture and trees and
yeah. So if there was a roundabout there and that allowed the speed to come down, all those things could start to unfold and curve.
Okay, fine. Look, that's helpful. One last question from me, and it's really, I've developed this, and it's really about what David was talking to you about let's wait for the district plan, let's wait for the next speed review, let's wait for the plan change 1 to be through as a new policy statement. You know, I call that Billy Gruff planning. There's always a bigger picture and there's always something to wait, and if we did that forever as planners, we wouldn't be doing anything. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. Yeah, and that definitely coloured pre-negotiations.
Yes. So that's this is a context that, you know, I certainly appreciate, and certainly Mika for the regional council was talking about, you know, why don't we just wait and just sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya and come up with a conclusion in 3-4 years' time.
Yeah, I understand the frustrations. I can advise on the pre-hearing, pre-application, pre-notification consultation if it would serve the committee and serve council. I don't know if it's helpful or not, but that was born in mind by Kotahi when I advised them on how to approach this.
Yes. The bigger picture, possibilities.
Yep. So I know that Somerset talked about, you know, what Kotahi came forward with some speed management, and that was a surprise to them. I could explain how that all came about and how Kotahi was trying to be enabling to avoid all these issues. I don't know if it will serve well at all.
I don't think so. We've got the general gist. There's been an attempt, hasn't worked. We're here, and I like to think that through good process and good spirit. If there's a good outcome to be achieved, with some further discussion, let's keep the door open, through this process we're running here. Okay, I've got a fly buzzing around on me again. That's why I'm backing my head and
Been annoying.
looking and things like that. So that's, yeah. Look, I think that's been a great discussion. It's been what I like. It's a peer discussion between us as professionals and you, and that's certainly been the case with all of with council and other experts as well. So thank you very much for your attendance and your efforts with your information in the summary statement. We'll take a break now. It's 3 o'clock.
That's what they call a late lunch.
Yes. Yes. I really wanted to get through Wakakatai's case, and then that's a finish for you.
Yes, that concludes our case. We'll be here until the end of the day, so we
Yes.
can discuss
Okay,
issues and.
all right. So perhaps let's talk about process from here, because I want to put the staff's mind at rest, and work through a reasonable process. We're at the end of, we've got 2 hours left on the end of a 3-day hearing on a Friday afternoon. My suggestion is that we focus the time, we have some lunch and we focus the time on the next steps, both in terms of the statement of facts we'd like from the engineers and the planner's process around section 32 and the options of and how we might set that up. I'd like to do that together and then issue a minute, just so that's nice and clear with some reasonable timeframes. So the steps as I see them is, and I'll take advice that we need to have that further information done as technical work feeding into the process. Then when that's completed, we should then get a written right of reply from the staff team. See whether, both from a legal planning point of view, whether you've changed your position, taking on board that extra information, to give us advice, because you've sat through the hearing as we have, and there's been a lot of information, a lot of food for thought, a lot of more information. And then after that, we'd have, as the requester has the last say, we would ask you to close, Daniel, with your closing submissions, which brings it all together. And I think because we've got new information today, you're fully able to come back to us with the position of your client, both on legal and evidential matters, as you'd like to end it with us.
Certainly.
Does that sound a reasonable process? Anyone else?
So we're going to speak, I mean, I've largely written my statement.
Yes.
Is that going to be filed like after today or?
I-
are we gonna
I-
speak one statement?
We've run out of time for the 4 of us to say summary submission, summary
So that-
statements now, haven't we?
That's my feeling, to do that justice. Like, if you've already written it, great.
They haven't seen it.
No, and I don't think it's fair, particularly for Rachel, who's helping with the case, and Megan, who's running things. So, yeah,
We probably still need to do
Yes.
that. We've all been up really late into the night and early this morning to try and get there, and we've just run out of time.
yes. I just want to have a fair and reasonable process that people feel we've got a good process ahead of us. So, shall we have lunch? Shall we think about a timeline that the parties should talk about over lunch and come back to us with a proposal that's agreed, and then we'll consider that and talk through the details after that. Okay, so if we break for a late afternoon or an afternoon tea, coming back at 4 o'clock, is that reasonable? 4 o'clock? Would be earlier. We've got to walk down the road to get our lunch and walk back, so it's really 45 minutes. Yes, let's do it at 4 o'clock. Thank you.